Random House Audio presents The Ecstasy of Influence by Jonathan Lethem. Read for you by Jonathan Lethem and Mark Deakins.
Hi, this is Jonathan Lethem, and I'm here today to read some of the audiobook of The Ecstasy of Influence. I'm going to begin with the preface and read several of the most important sections of the book from a personal standpoint, but I'm not reading the whole book to you. I'm instead leaving the preponderance of it in the hands of my favorite of my audiobook readers, Mark Deakins, who's much more qualified than I am to do long stretches of vast, complicated prose and in an intriguing and charming style. I'm not as good a reader of my own work as Mark is by half. So you'll hear a bit from me, and then you'll hear quite a lot from Mark, and then at some point you'll hear a little bit from me again if you stay with this whole thing. Thanks very much for listening. The book begins with 3 epigraphs from other writers. The first one is from Friedrich Nietzsche, from his book Human All Too Human. The artist's sense of truth. Regarding truths, the artist has a weaker morality than the thinker. He definitely does not want to be deprived of the splendid and profound interpretations of life, and he resists sober, simple methods and results. Apparently, he fights for the higher dignity and significance of man. In truth, he does not want to give up the most effective presuppositions of his art, the fantastic, mythical, uncertain, extreme, the sense of the symbolic, the overestimation of the person, the faith in some miraculous element in the genius. Thus, he considers the continued existence of his kind of creation more important than scientific devotion to the truth in every form, however plain. The second epigraph is from Manny Farber, from his critical essay, White Elephant versus Termite Art. The idea of art as an expensive hunk of well-regulated area, both logical and magical, sits heavily over the talent of every modern painter. The third epigraph is from Ander Monson, from an essay called The Essay Vanishes. You must have made inconceivable promises, unsupportable by facts, in your ardor, and that counted for something. And were you asked to hold to them, or were you not? Preface. Part 1. Undressing me, addressing you. Somewhere, I can't find it now, there's a book with a preface in which a writer of fiction admitted he couldn't write the preface to the book you now hold in your hands until he'd conceived of the preface as a story about a writer of fiction writing a preface. Only then could he begin. Saying this, the reader of said preface was presumably drawn into an awareness that the voices in so-called nonfictions were themselves artful impostures, arrangements of sentences, and of the implications residing behind the sentences that mimicked the presence of a human being offering sincerely intended and honestly useful guidance into this or that complicated area of human thought or experience. According to this belief, even an auto manual or cookbook possessed an implied author. Sure, you say, tell me something I don't know. But let's keep in mind that the opposite belief flourishes, i.e., that we all possess the capacity and therefore also the responsibility to testify out of some unmediatedly true self. Or, if mediation goes on, that it's of as little importance as the jotting hand of various forgotten human scribes who happened to capture God's words when they authored the Bible. This belief is clung to with a ferocity that suggests something immense might be at stake. But I've introduced a confusion, even at the outset of this long test of your patience. That writer I mention isn't me, or even me. He's, I just remembered this, an American science fiction writer named Robert Sheckley. Born 1928, died 2005. Sheckley's description works for me, though. I've never managed a routine book review, let alone an essay I thought worth reprinting, without first having to invent a character who'd be issuing the remarks the essay would subsequently record. and also figuring out what motivations this guy, call him Lethem, would have for working his thoughts into language. By practical necessity, I'm firmly in the doubting nonfiction is exactly possible camp, Lethem typed insouciantly. The reader of the preface is a fiction too. No, wait, I don't, for Christ's sakes, mean you, dear fleshly friend, semi-loyal eyeball. Hey, I clasp your hand. A knowledge that people live close by is, I think, enough, and even if only first names are ever exchanged, the people who own them seem rock-true and marvelously self-sufficient. That's from a John Ashbery poem called The Ongoing Story. I'm not looking to try to persuade you that you're a cyborg, mosaic, site, interface, or any other post-human thing. My point is more that you're pre-human, actually. I'm addressing you before you've been quite willing to appear, pretending you've arrived in order to have someone to gab with until you get here. Painting your portrait to find out what you look like. Only sometimes, often, you won't sit still. Example. The odd fact is that naming Sheckley as a science fiction writer cost me some discomfort, but an extremely familiar and tolerable form of discomfort, one I routinely self-inflict for the useful friction it generates in the conversation into which I've tossed the term. You, postulated readers, aren't you now divided into two teams? Those appalled with me for being dodgy about Sheckley and his affiliations, and those disgruntled because they didn't know, or want to know, his name? Have a look at yourselves, on either side of the room, like tweens at a dance party. Shouldn't one or the other gender be exiting the floor about now? But stay. Please do stay. Part 2. Self-consciousness, Objections 2. No one is obligated to care that writers sometimes, or often, think such self-conscious stuff as the above. There are onslaughts of evidence that mention of these matters annoy the hell out of some readers. Many people prefer artists to make statements along the lines of, I don't know what I'm doing, I just go into a small, badly furnished room and out come these stories. Or, the songs write themselves. Or, the paint tells me where it wants to go, etc. Even readers with an appetite for the dynamic curlicues of intellection, so typical of the prose of forthrightly self-conscious, ontology-obsessed writers, John Barth being a perfect example, can suddenly grow nauseated by a disproportion of the stuff over time. Hence Barth's terrifying decline in popularity. David Foster Wallace deserves to be remembered as a great writer, not because he was capable of doing PhD-level philosophical speculation as well as shunting fictional characters slowly through a well-described room, but because he mastered a certain area of human sensation totally. Intricate self-conscious remorse at the fact of self-consciousness. Wallace's way of loading up this indistinct area with scrupulous depiction made a lot of people feel less lonely. Meanwhile, the possibility that being the depictor made Wallace feel more lonely has become a widely circulated armchair shrink's allegory for the non-usefulness of self-consciousness. Because it doesn't help. Doesn't help the depressed person feel undepressed. Doesn't help the storyteller tell the story. Just do it. That's the top-to-bottom scream of our culture, and a good anthem for skippers not only of prefaces to books, but of entire collections of occasional pieces by those who ought to have had the grace to stick to storytelling. Never mind where that slippery slope might get you, or how the attitude sheers toward the same anti-intellectual currents in American life that would shovel reading novels per se into a trench along with a lot of other things you hold dear, if you're still with me at this point. Bias, spoiler alert. I think I'm an intellectual, and I think you are too, whether you like it or not. I can't help thinking so. All of these thoughts fall into the category of things I can't help thinking, despite having sometimes tried not to, thinking it was my duty to do so. It turns out I can't help being the self-conscious kind of artist, one who pits himself compulsively against bogus valorizing of notions of originality, authenticity, or naturalism in the arts. This is where a certain political implication comes out of hiding, and it's a political implication very dear to me. For if we consent that what appears natural in art is
Sample complete. Ready to continue?